The Galactic Council had watched Earth for a long time, from their gleaming orbital platform Viridia Prime. They observed humans through silent probes and hidden sensors. They saw wars, art, kindness, cruelty, laughter, and tears. To the Council, this mix made no sense. Their own civilizations had long ago smoothed out such chaos. Emotions were regulated. Conflict was resolved through logic. Progress moved in calm, predictable lines. Humans, by contrast, seemed messy, loud, and full of contradictions. The Council was made up of 17 species, each older and more advanced than the last. Some had mastered gravity. Others bent time in small ways. All agreed on one thing: humanity was not ready. Not for membership. Not for trust. Not even for basic respect. They had debated Earth's petition for decades, but the final decision came quickly, once the data was reviewed. The humans were too emotional, too reckless, too young. On the Day of Judgment, ambassadors from every member species gathered in the grand chamber of Viridia Prime. The walls shimmered with soft blue light, and the air hummed with translated whispers. At the center of the room stood Corin Vex, the Velnari representative. Tall and slender, with silver skin and eyes like polished obsidian, he carried himself with the quiet certainty of someone who had never been wrong. He held a data crystal in his three-fingered hand. Inside it was the official verdict. He activated the crystal. A voice, calm and toneless, echoed through the chamber and across every connected network in the galaxy. The Galactic Council has reviewed the biological, cultural, and technological profile of Homo sapiens. Based on observed behavior, historical instability, and lack of unified governance, the species is hereby declared inferior. Earth and its colonies are placed under Level 4 quarantine. No diplomatic, scientific, or military exchanges permitted. This decision is final. The message repeated in over 200 languages, including English. On Earth, it played on every screen, every speaker, every public channel. People stopped in the streets. Pilots froze in cockpits. Children looked up from their games. In New York, a man named Carl Briggs stood in a coffee shop, his cup halfway to his lips as the words washed over him. In Nairobi, engineer Lena Ortiz paused her work on a solar array, her hand still on the tools. In Buenos Aires, teenager Derek Cole muted his music and stared at the sky, wondering if the stars had just turned their backs. There was no warning. No chance to appeal. Just a cold, clean sentence delivered from beings who had never walked on Earth, never felt rain, never lost someone they loved. The Council didn't hate humans. That would have been too human of them. They simply didn't care enough to understand. Back on Viridia Prime, the ambassadors dispersed without discussion. To them, the matter was closed. Corin Vex returned to his quarters, already thinking about the next agenda item, regulating asteroid mining in the Helios Belt. He did not expect a response from Earth. Inferior species rarely protested. They either faded away or adapted quietly. But Earth did not stay quiet. Within hours, protests erupted in every major city. Not just angry crowds, though there were plenty of those, but also scientists holding vigils outside research labs, teachers rewriting lessons to include galactic politics, and artists projecting messages of defiance onto the sides of skyscrapers. Governments scrambled to respond. Some called for calm, others demanded action, but for the first time in generations, the world felt united, not by a treaty or a war, but by a shared wound. At the United Earth Defense Command in Geneva, retired linguist Frank Delgado watched the Council's broadcast for the 7th time. He was old, with thin white hair and tired eyes, but his mind was sharp. He had spent his life studying how languages shaped thought. Now he wondered how a civilization that spoke only in logic could miss the truth hiding in human noise. They see chaos, he murmured to no one. But chaos is just order waiting to be understood. Meanwhile, on the edge of the solar system, far beyond Pluto, a small mining vessel named the Rustwing drifted through the dark. Its crew of 6 had been harvesting ice from comets for months. They were used to silence, but when the Council's message reached them, even the void felt heavier. Carl Briggs, yes, the same Carl from the coffee shop, now on rotation in deep space, read the transcript twice. He didn't shout. He didn't cry. He just sat in the dim cockpit staring at the starfield and said, "Fine, let them think we're nothing. We'll show them what nothing can do." No one on Earth knew it yet, but something was stirring in the Kuiper Belt. A faint energy pulse, older than the sun, had just flickered to life. It wasn't human. It wasn't council. It was something else, something hungry. And it was waking up. But the council didn't notice. They were too busy filing reports and scheduling maintenance for their peacekeeping drones. They assumed the galaxy was safe. They assumed humans would stay in their place. They were wrong on both counts. On Earth, people began to work harder. Not out of fear, but out of pride. Factories ran double shifts. Universities opened emergency research tracks. Kids built model rockets in their backyards, dreaming not of fame, but of proving a point. The council had called them inferior. That word stuck in their throats like glass. Frank Delgado received a message from an old friend in Tokyo. It said only, "They don't know us." He smiled for the first time in days. No, they didn't. And maybe that was the one advantage humanity still had. As night fell over Geneva, Delgado stepped outside and looked up. The stars were the same as always, cold, distant, indifferent. But somewhere out there a mistake had been made. And humans, for all their flaws, were very good at correcting mistakes. The council thought they had ended the story. They had only just begun it. Months passed after the council's judgment. Life on Earth went on, but not as before. People moved with a quiet urgency, as if every hour mattered more than it used to. Factories hummed late into the night. Schools added new classes on astrophysics and xenolinguistics. Even street artists painted murals of rockets and open hands reaching toward the stars. The word inferior had cut deep, but instead of breaking, humanity bent, then pushed back harder. Out near the edge of the solar system, far from the noise of Earth, the mining vessel Rustwing continued its slow work. Carl Briggs piloted the ship with steady hands, his eyes always scanning the dark. Lena Ortiz kept the engines running, her fingers dancing over cracked screens and patched wiring. They were part of a small team harvesting ice from comets, water for Earth's growing colonies on Mars and the Moon. It was lonely work, but they didn't mind. Out here, silence felt honest. One Tuesday, or what passed for Tuesday in deep space, Lena noticed something strange on the long-range sensors. A flicker. Not a ship. Not a rock. Just a brief pulse of energy. Too regular to be natural, too weak to be dangerous. She called Carl over. "You seeing this?" she asked, pointing at the screen. Carl leaned in, frowning. "Could be a glitch. Solar flare bouncing off old debris. But it happened again. And again. Every 17 minutes, like a heartbeat buried in the ice. They reported it to Earth Command, but the reply was slow and cautious. "Log it, monitor, do not investigate." The Council's quarantine still held, and Earth didn't want to give them any reason to tighten it. Still, Carl couldn't let it go. That night he reran the data. The signal wasn't random. It had structure, patterns, almost like a language, but colder, sharper. He showed it to Derek Cole, the young astrophysicist who'd been assigned to their mission as a science observer. Derek's eyes lit up. "This isn't human," he said softly. "And it's not council tech either. The energy signature? It's older. Way older." Against orders, they adjusted course. Just a little. Just enough to get a clearer look. 3 days later, they found it. Drifting in the shadow of a dead comet, half buried in cosmic dust, was a ship. But not like any ship they'd ever seen. It was black, smooth, and covered in strange grooves that seemed to shift when you looked at them too long. No lights, no markings, no signs of life. It was silent, ancient, and wrong in a way that made their skin crawl. Lena wanted to turn back. "That thing gives me the creeps," she said, but Carl shook his head. "We can't just leave it." "What if it's a warning, or a weapon?" They sent a probe. The moment it touched the hull, the ship woke up, not with lights or alarms, but with movement. Tiny, spider-like machines poured from hidden seams in the hull. They moved fast, too fast. They latched onto the probe, then onto nearby ice chunks, then onto stray metal fragments. Within minutes, they began building, replicating, reshaping, growing. Derek's voice was tight with fear. They're self-replicating nanodrones. And they're feeding. The Rustwing pulled back just as the swarm turned toward them. Not aggressively, not intelligently, just hungrily, like fire meeting dry wood. Carl sent an emergency burst transmission to Earth. Unknown alien tech active in Kuiper Belt, self-replicating, consuming matter. Threat level unknown but rising. This time, Earth listened. Within hours, every deep space sensor was pointed at the anomaly. Scientists worked around the clock. The drones weren't attacking. They were expanding, building more of themselves from anything they touched: ice, rock, metal, even radiation. And they were spreading outward in a slow, steady wave. On Viridia Prime, the Council received the data too, but their response was calm, almost bored. A dormant Zara relic, one analyst said. Extinct for 10,000 cycles. No threat, they were wrong. The Zara weren't extinct. Their machines were. And machines don't die. They wait. Back on Earth, panic began to rise. If the swarm reached the inner planets, it would strip everything. Asteroids, moons, even Earth itself, down to raw atoms. There was no defense. No known weapon could stop something that turned destruction into more destruction. But then something unexpected happened. Instead of hiding, people started helping. Engineers in Mumbai shared drone shield designs online. Programmers in São Paulo wrote code to jam the swarm's replication signals. Farmers in Iowa donated power from their solar fields to boost Earth's comms network. It wasn't organized. It wasn't perfect. But it was fast. Frank Delgado, now acting as Earth's unofficial voice to the stars, sent a message to the Council. We have a problem. We need help. The reply came 3 days later. Cold. Final. Quarantine remains in effect. Handle your own anomalies. That was the moment everything changed. Carl, still orbiting the swarm's edge, heard the message over the comms. He didn't curse. He just turned to Lena and said, "Then we handle it ourselves." Derek had an idea. The swarm used electromagnetic fields to bind matter. If they could disrupt those fields, even for a second, they might break the replication cycle. But they'd need a massive energy pulse, focused and precise, something like a solar flare. But controlled, that's impossible, Lena said. Not if we use the sun itself, Derek replied. They called it Operation Iron Bloom. The plan was wild. Launch a fleet of modified solar sails, thin, reflective sheets usually used for propulsion, toward the sun. Use magnetic tethers to charge them, then slingshot them toward the swarm. At the right moment, release the stored energy in a single, directed burst. It wouldn't destroy the swarm, but it might stun it long enough to strike the core ship. No one had ever tried anything like it, but Earth didn't have time for never. In shipyards from Luna to Titan's Reach, workers built the sails by hand. Students coded targeting algorithms in dorm rooms. Retired pilots volunteered for the mission, knowing the odds were bad. Natalie Ruiz, a former Marine with a sharp mind and steady hands, signed up to lead the strike team. She didn't say much. She just showed up, suited up, and asked, "Where do I go?" Carl and his crew were recalled to Earth orbit to help train the pilots. As their shuttle docked with the new command station, Carl looked down at the blue planet below. It looked small, fragile, but he knew better. Humans were messy. They argued. They cried. They made mistakes. But when the universe said no, they always whispered back, "Watch me." The Council thought they'd seen the end of humanity's story. But the real story was just getting started. And this time, humans wouldn't ask for permission, they'd act. Earth moved like a single living thing. After the Council's cold refusal, something shifted in the air. Not despair, but focus. People stopped waiting for permission. They started building. In cities, towns, and remote labs, hands worked while minds raced. The threat in the Kuiper Belt was growing. Every hour, the swarm consumed more matter, grew denser, smarter. It wasn't alive, but it learned, and it was heading inward. Derek Cole's idea, using solar sails to disrupt the swarm, sounded impossible. But impossible was all they had left. Teams across the planet broke the plan into pieces. One group worked on the sails, weaving ultra-thin films from recycled satellite parts. Another built magnetic tethers strong enough to hold a charge from the sun's corona. A third rewrote navigation software to fly the sails through solar winds without burning up. None of it had been tested. None of it was perfect, but it was ready in 6 weeks. Natalie Ruiz stood in the hangar of the orbital station Horizon, watching the final checks. She wore a flight suit 2 sizes too big. Hers had been lost in transit, but she didn't care. Around her, volunteers moved with quiet purpose. Some were soldiers. Some were teachers. Some were kids who'd never left Earth until last month. They weren't professionals. They were people who said yes when the world asked. Carl Briggs arrived with Lena Ortiz. both still dusty from their deep space run. Carl had lost weight. His eyes were tired but sharp. He walked straight to Natalie. "I'm flying lead," he said. She didn't argue. She just nodded. "You know the swarm changes course every few hours. We get one shot." "I know," he said. Down on Earth, Frank Delgado coordinated the global effort from a basement command center in Geneva. Maps covered the walls, glowing with data streams from every continent. He didn't give orders. He connected people. A physicist in Cairo needed a rare alloy. Frank found a scrapyard in Chile that had it. A coder in Oslo hit a wall. Frank patched her through to a teenager in Manila who'd solved the same problem in a school project. It wasn't a military operation. It was a web of trust, spun fast and thin but strong enough to hold. The day of launch came quietly. No speeches. No fanfare. Just a series of green lights on a screen. One by one, the solar sails detached from the station and arced toward the sun. 32 in total. Each carried a warhead cobbled together from old missile parts and experimental fusion cores. They weren't meant to explode like bombs. They were meant to flash, bright, hot, and precise, like a camera going off in a dark room. Carl piloted the command ship, Wayfarer, a patched-together freighter retrofitted with extra shielding and comms. Lena sat beside him, hands on the engine controls. Behind them, Natalie and her team waited in drop pods, ready to move if the swarm's core ship showed weakness. As they neared the swarm's outer edge, the sensors screamed. The drones had grown. What was once a cloud was now a storm, a shifting wall of metal and motion swallowing comets whole. It pulsed with a low hum that vibrated in their bones. "Stay calm," Carl said, though his voice shook. "Stick to the plan." The sails reached the sun. They dipped into the corona, charging like batteries. Then, guided by Derek's algorithms, they turned and raced back toward the swarm. The timing had to be perfect. Too early and the charge would fade. Too late and the swarm would absorb them before they fired. Back on Earth, millions watched the feed. Not on official channels. The Council had blocked those. But on pirate streams, school projectors, even old radios patched into satellite relays. A farmer in Kenya held his daughter close. A nurse in Vancouver paused between shifts. A boy in Reykjavik whispered, "Go." The first sail hit the swarm's edge. For a second, nothing happened. Then light. A blinding white flash ripped through the darkness. The drones near it froze, their replication cycles broken. But the swarm adapted fast. It pulled back, shielding its core. "Second wave," Carl said, more sails fired. Flash after flash lit the void. Each one carved a hole in the swarm, but the holes closed quickly. The core ship, the black ancient thing, remained untouched, buried deep in the storm. "We're not getting through," Lena said, her voice tight. Natalie's voice crackled over the comm. "Then we go in." Before Carl could stop her, her drop pod launched. 6 others followed. Tiny specks against an ocean of machines. They used the flashes as cover, darting through gaps in the swarm. Their mission wasn't to destroy. It was to find the core's weak point, the place where the original signal pulsed from. Inside the swarm, it was chaos. Drones swarmed around the pods like angry insects. Shields flared and died. One pod vanished without a sound. Then another. But Natalie's pod held. She saw it, a seam in the black hull glowing faintly blue. "There," she said. "Target that seam." Carl didn't hesitate. He armed the last warhead, a jury-rigged fusion device they'd saved for emergencies. "Lena, give me everything," the engines roared. The Wayfarer shot forward, weaving through the swarm like a needle through cloth. Drones slammed into the hull. Alarms blared. But Carl kept going. At the last second, he released the warhead. It flew true, striking the seam just as Natalie's pod exploded its own charge from the inside. A silent blast bloomed in the dark. Not fire, but pure energy, rippling outward, tearing through the swarm's network. One by one, the drones stopped. They didn't explode. They just fell, drifting dead into the void. The core ship cracked open, then went dark. Silence returned to the Kuiper Belt. On the Wayfarer, Carl slumped in his seat. Lena let out a breath she'd been holding for hours. Natalie's pod was gone, but her last transmission played on loop. "Tell Earth." We held the line. Back home, people didn't cheer. They cried. They hugged strangers. They looked at the sky and felt something new. Not fear, but pride. They had done it. Not with perfect tech, not with council help, But with stubborn hope and borrowed parts and the kind of courage that doesn't wear a uniform, the swarm was dead. The threat was over. And somewhere on Viridia Prime, Corin Vex watched the data stream with wide eyes. He saw humans do in 6 weeks what his civilization would have spent decades planning. He saw sacrifice without reward. Ingenuity without arrogance. For the first time, he wondered if the Council had made a terrible mistake. But on Earth, no one was thinking about the Council. They were already cleaning up, healing wounds and asking one quiet question: what's next? News of the swarm's defeat spread faster than anyone expected. It wasn't just Earth that heard, it was the whole galaxy. The data burst from human ships carried more than victory. It carried proof that the Zara threat was real, proof that the Council had ignored it, and proof that humans, the so-called inferior species, had stopped it alone. On Viridia Prime, the reaction was slow at first. Most ambassadors dismissed the reports as exaggeration. Humans were known for drama, they said, but then the long-range sensors confirmed it. The energy signature from the Kuiper belt had vanished. The swarm was gone. Only debris remained floating in neat, lifeless clouds. And at its center, the broken hull of a Zara warship, older than any record, more dangerous than any legend. Corin Vex stood alone in the observation dome, staring at the star map. His silver skin dimmed with unease. He had read the Zara archives. His people had studied them for generations. The Zara weren't just conquerors. They were erasers. They didn't kill civilizations. They unmade them atom by atom, turning worlds into raw material for more machines. The Council had believed the Zara extinct. They had been wrong, and their mistake could have cost everyone everything. Worse, they had left Earth to face it alone. Protests began on Viridia Prime within days. Not from humans, Earth had no voice there, but from younger members of other species. Students, artists, even junior diplomats gathered in the grand plazas, holding signs made of light and sound. "Honor the humans," one read. "We almost lost everything," said another. The Council's image, once unshakable, now cracked under the weight of its own pride. Corin tried to stay calm. He reviewed the footage again and again. Not just the battle, but what came before. He saw humans working in shifts with no sleep, sharing food with strangers, sending messages like, "I've got your back," across languages and borders. He saw Carl Briggs flying into certain death not for glory, but because someone had to. He saw Natalie Ruiz give her life without hesitation. These weren't the actions of an inferior species. These were the actions of a people who understood something the Council had forgotten: that strength isn't just power, it's care. Back on Earth, life returned to a new kind of normal. There were funerals, quiet ones, no grand speeches, just families holding hands and remembering names. But there was also rebuilding. Engineers studied the dead drones, learning how they worked. Scientists mapped the Zara ship's design, hoping to find more relics before they woke. And children drew pictures of the Wayfarer like it was a dragon slayer from an old myth. Frank Delgado received a message from an unexpected source. It was encrypted but not well. He recognized the signature. It was from a junior aide in the Velnari delegation. The message was short. "The Council knows it was wrong. Some want to fix it. Others are afraid. Watch closely." Frank didn't reply. He just saved the message and walked outside. The air smelled like rain. He thought about Carl, Lena, Derek, Natalie, and all the others who had stood in the dark and said no. They hadn't done it for thanks. They'd done it because it was right. Meanwhile, across the galaxy, other worlds began to reach out. Not officially, quarantine still stood, but quietly. A trader from the Kessari system sent a crate of medical supplies, by accident, to a Mars colony. A scholar from the Orlan Reach published a paper praising human problem-solving, calling it adaptive brilliance. Even a few Council-aligned newsnets ran stories about Earth's victory, though they downplayed human skill and called it luck. But luck doesn't build solar sails in 6 weeks. Luck doesn't fly into a machine storm knowing you might not come back. Corin Vex finally requested an emergency session. He stood before the full Council, his voice steady but his hands trembling slightly. "We judged a species by its noise, not its heart," he said. "We called them inferior because they feel too much. But feeling is what made them act when we stood still. The Zara are not gone, only sleeping. And if another wakes, will we be ready? Or will we wait for the humans to save us again?" Silence filled the chamber. No one argued. No one could. The session ended with a single vote. Not to lift quarantine, that would take time, but to send a delegation to Earth. Not to inspect. Not to test, but to listen. Corin chose the members carefully. No hardliners. No skeptics, just open minds, and he included himself. As their ship prepared to leave Viridia Prime, Corin looked at Earth's coordinates on the screen. He thought about the word inferior. It felt heavy now, like a stone in his throat. He wondered if humans would even let them land. On Earth, Frank Delgado got the official notice. The council was coming. Not to apologize, not yet. But to talk. He didn't smile. He didn't frown. He just turned to his assistant and said, "Prepare the welcome room. But don't roll out the red carpet. Let them earn it." In orbit, Carl Briggs and Lena Ortiz watched the council ship approach on their monitors. They were on recovery duty, scanning the debris field for anything useful. "You think they'll say sorry?" Lena asked. Carl shrugged. "Doesn't matter. We didn't do it for them." And that was the truth. Humans hadn't fought the swarm to prove themselves to the galaxy. They'd fought because their home was in danger, because people they loved were at risk, because stopping evil was the right thing to do, even if no one was watching. The council ship slowed as it neared Earth's atmosphere. Its lights blinked in a pattern meant to show peace. Down below, cities stayed lit, factories kept running. Kids kept building rockets in their yards. Earth didn't stop for the council. It never had. And as the alien vessel descended, one thing became clear to everyone, human and alien alike. The galaxy had underestimated humanity, and it would never make that mistake again. The council ship landed not in Geneva, not in Washington or Beijing, but on a quiet field outside Reykjavik. Frank Delgado met them there alone, wearing a simple coat and holding a thermos of coffee. No soldiers, no banners, just a man in his silence. Corin Vex stepped out first, his silver skin dull in the gray morning light. He looked smaller than in the broadcasts, less like a judge, more like someone who had carried a heavy thought for too long. They didn't shake hands. Humans touched too much, Velnari too little. Instead, Corin bowed slightly, a gesture rare among his people. "We come to speak," he said. Frank nodded. "Then speak." Inside a borrowed community hall with rain tapping on the roof, the real meeting began. No grand chamber, no floating screens, just wooden chairs and a table scarred with years of use. The council delegation sat stiffly. Frank poured coffee for everyone, even though he knew they wouldn't drink it. It was human to offer. Corin spoke first. He didn't hide behind words. He admitted the council's error. He named their arrogance. He spoke of the Jara threat they had ignored, the lives they had risked by doing nothing. Then he said what no one expected. "We were wrong to call you inferior. You are not like us, but that does not make you less. It makes you different. And in this case, it made you better." The room stayed quiet. Frank didn't smile. He just said, "Good, now what?" Corin explained the council's offer. Full membership. A seat on the security conclave, the highest council of defense in the galaxy. Immediate lifting of quarantine. Access to shared knowledge, trade routes, and protection. It was everything Earth had asked for months ago, but Frank shook his head. "We don't want your seat." The ambassadors exchanged glances. One of them, a green-scaled diplomat from the Morel Collective, leaned forward. "You refuse?" "No," Frank said. "We just don't want it like this. Not as a gift. Not as pity. We want a new deal." He laid out Earth's terms. They would share everything they'd learned about the Jara, every scan, every code, every weakness in the swarm's design, with every species in the galaxy, freely, no cost. But in return, the council would change how it judged others. No more labels, no more inferior or primitive. Judgments would be based on actions, not assumptions, and any species facing a threat like the Jara would get help, fast, fair, and without politics. Corin listened. Then he nodded. "It is fair?" The other ambassadors argued at first. Old habits die hard. But Corin held firm. "If we do not change," he said, "we will fail again. And next time, there may be no humans to save us." In the end, they agreed. The announcement went out that same day, broadcast across every channel in every language. The council rescinded its judgment. Earth was not inferior. Earth was essential. And a new compact, the Human Compact, was born, named not for pride but for principle. Back on Viridia Prime, the news sparked joy, confusion, and quiet shame. Statues of past council leaders were quietly removed from public squares. Schools added human history to their curricula, and for the first time, a human-made phrase began appearing in galactic data streams. "We don't need your approval, but we'll stand with you anyway." On Earth, people didn't celebrate with parades. They went back to work. Scientists shared Zara data with researchers on distant worlds. Engineers helped rebuild a damaged Kasari freighter that had strayed too close to a solar flare. Even Carl Briggs, now grounded for medical checks, spent his days training young pilots from a dozen species via video link. Lena Ortiz returned to deep space, this time with a mixed crew, human, Velnari, and 2 others. Their mission? Search for more Zara relics before they woke. She didn't trust the aliens at first, but after a week of fixing engines together, sharing meals, and laughing at the same bad jokes, she realized something. They weren't so different, just scared in their own ways. Derek Cole became Earth's lead advisor on alien tech. He was only 24, but no one cared about his age anymore. They cared that he saw patterns others missed. He worked late most nights, but always made time to call his little sister in Buenos Aires. "Tell me about your day," he'd say. And she would in long, excited sentences about school and friends and dreams. Frank Delgado never took a title. He refused to be called ambassador or representative. He just stayed in his small house near the lake, answering messages, connecting people, and reminding everyone, human and alien alike, that trust is built one honest word at a time. The Council offered Earth a grand embassy on Viridia Prime. Frank said no. "Put it in Nairobi," he told them, or Jakarta, or Lima, somewhere real. They did, and it became the busiest diplomatic hub in the galaxy, not because it was fancy, but because it felt like home. Years later, when new threats emerged, rogue AIs, dying stars, lost civilizations waking from sleep, the galaxy didn't wait for the Council to act. They called Earth first, not because humans had the best weapons, but because they had the clearest hearts in Corin Vex. He stayed on Earth for a long time, learned to drink coffee, walked in the rain, sat with Frank on that same field outside Reykjavik, watching the stars. One night he asked, "Why did you help us after what we said?" Frank looked up at the sky. "Because someone had to believe in you too." Corin didn't answer. But for the first time, his silver skin glowed faintly, like dawn on still water. The galaxy was still vast. Still dangerous, but it was no longer cold, because humanity had shown them that even the smallest voice speaking truth in the dark can change everything. And no one ever called them inferior again.